Well, good afternoon, Nielson. How y'all doing? So good to be with you today. Thank you, Marcus and Kamisha, for your work here, and thank you for showing up today. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be with you. Now, I am a preacher, and I understand this only goes for 3 hours. Good. About 3 hours. Don't worry, I'm not going to offend anybody religiously or do a sermon or anything like that. So if that causes you any concern, you can take a deep breath. We're all good to go, all right? But at the end, I will take an offering. Is that okay with you? Can we just settle it there? And, we just had a great meal. I don't know who put all that together, but let's give a hand to the restaurant or the people who worked. There was a health study that was done, and they found out that the Japanese eat, fewer fat calories than Americans, and as a result of it, they suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. They also found out that Mexicans actually eat more fat than Americans, and yet they suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. The South Africans drink a amount of wine. They too suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. The French, on the other hand, drink excessive amounts of wine, and they too suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. Even the Germans, they eat, all kinds of sausage and drink beer, and guess what the study showed? That they too suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. So the results of the study were perfectly clear. The bottom line is you can eat anything you want. Apparently, it's speaking English that will kill you. Understand that. With all the diversity going on in the world, we've got to make sure that we have the art of inclusion down. We've got to be sure that we understand how to work and live and worship with people that are so different. And yes, my church has over 52 different nations in it, so many different ethnicities, and several of you here who I've recognized go to Bridgeway as well, and it's great to see you. But the reality is, Dr. Martin Luther King said 11 a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. He said that over 50 years ago, 55 to be exact, and guess what? It's still the most segregated hour of the week. So even if we work together, we live together, and we shop together, somehow people will go to their racially segregated spiritual water fountains and receive spiritual sustenance and go home and think that it's okay, because we can self-select to do that. You probably didn't self-select the people that you're working around right now, so you find yourself in the middle of diversity, but for the most part, a lot of you had nothing to do with it. But then when you have a choice to select, where do you select? Oftentimes we'll select places where we feel comfortable, but also where we feel most welcome. If we feel included, then we want to go. If we feel invited and welcome, then we want to be a part of it. But if we do not feel that welcome, if we do not feel that invitation and that warmth, then we will not stay. And so what we find out is when we go do diversity training, and when we actually do multi-leadership development at Fortune 100 companies is where our sort of target is, we find out that it takes a lot of money to bring in diversity, but it takes a lot of money to keep diversity, and you lose a lot of money when you don't leverage diversity. And so how then can an organization not only attract it, but how do they keep it? And how do they make it so beautiful that they want to stay? You see, if you lose your diversity, you lose your dollars. And so whether we're consulting Johnson Controls or Walt Disney World or Whirlpool, whoever it may be, the reality is if you spend all this money to bring in a sharp executive, you say, look, we need women on our board, or we need African Americans department, or we need to find a guy like Marcus or Kamisha. So what is it going to take then to draw them in? How do we make sure that we can get the best of the Hispanics, the best of the Asians? You've got the Koreans and you've got the Filipinos. How do we get them? How do we keep them? How do we include them so that they actually feel like they're a part of it? Not that they're a target, not that they're an assignment. How do they actually feel like, wow, I want to be there. I want to be a part of it. And what corporations find out is when they don't get it right, they lose a lot of money. Because there's another company that's doing it right, and what are they trying to do? They're trying to headhunt and recruit that person that you spent all that money to recruit, you moved them to your company, you got them leadership training, and guess what? They're out the door, and then it's in the exit interview that they find out the person never felt like it was actually a warm place to work. In fact, they use words like it was chauvinistic, it was racist, Nobody ever made it to the top that didn't look like the people already at the top. The list goes on. And that's when they call David Anderson. And that's when we fly in with a group of people. And that's when they say, how in the world can you get thousands of people to do it for free and they even pay money to stay? We're paying money to get them here and we can't keep them to stay. And one of the things we learned is that there are some things that you can't buy, but if you believe it, then you will receive it. If you believe that inclusion is something that is powerful because it's something that I would believe as a preacher, here you're going to get your God moment right here. I believe it's God ordained because every single person's created in his image. If you actually believe that, then it will change everything with regard to how you do business, how you do church, how you do community leadership, how you do parenting, and the list goes on. So one of the things we found out as I was doing all kinds of study and running around doing all this work that I didn't even realize I was called to do. I knew I was called to start a church. I knew I wanted to start a church that was non-denominational. I knew I wanted to start a church that was multicultural, that would cause people to be sad that they had to wait a week to come back. I knew I wanted that, but I didn't see it anywhere. And so there was such a distinct difference in my upbringing. I grew up in a sort of a multicultural world, but in a Black traditional church. I had white friends and we could play football and ride bikes together, but they went to their white churches. And so my life was a confluence of different races, but at the same time, how could we cause a place that would cause people to want to be there and they come for free? It's not like, oh, I got to go to work. It's like, no, I will change my flights to be there. And if you could take that and teach it to organizations, could it work? And if it worked in organizations, could it work in colleges? If it worked in colleges, could it work in communities? If it worked in communities, could it work in countries that are war-torn, where people are fighting and killing one another? Could it actually help start wars and help free elections? We found out that gracism works. Gracism is what I call God's solution to racism. I'll tell you up front that the G stands for God. You put God in front of any problem, he'll give you the strength to get through it and the solution to it. But it's more than a catchy word. It's actually 7 standards, 7 sayings, 7 core principles that if you take them and integrate them into your work team, your department, your corporation, your country, if you take them and you insert them into the constitution of what you're trying to do, you'll find that the art of inclusion will actually not only surface, but flourish. So this is why I wrote the book, Gracism, The Art of Inclusion. Let me explain a little bit of definitions really quickly. Then I'll give you the 7 sayings. I won't explain them all. I'll just kind of give you a sentence on each one. And then I'll double click on one of them to dive in just a little bit deeper. And then I'll show you a little video of how it all ties together. And then we'll have some time for Q&A if we can get through all of that quick enough. Does that sound good? Okay, so here's the first thing. What is gracism? Well, it's a combination of 2 words, one negative and one positive, okay? So the negative word is that bad word, racism. All right. Now, let me tell you what racism is. Easily defined, very simply, is to speak, act, or think negatively about someone else solely based on their color, class, or culture. All right. There's a whole lot in there, but to make it a simple one-sentence definition, racism: to speak, act, or think negatively about someone based on their color, class, or culture. So instead of calling someone a racist, to speak, act, or think. Is it something that is said, something that is done, or something that is thought? You can go after that a whole lot better than just calling someone a racist. That doesn't help them. So that's how I define racism. Grace is the positive word. Remember, gracism is made up of 2 words. Grace is unmerited favor that is extended, positive favor that is extended to everyone. And you don't earn it, you can't repay it. There's nothing you can do to get it. It's just favor. All right? Even the way it sounds, grace. Can you just say grace? Grace. Doesn't that sound good? One more time, grace. Grace. It's just positive favor extended that you cannot earn, you cannot repay, you don't even deserve it. It's just favor. So what happens then when you take those two words and you put them together? It's the word I coined, gracism. So what does gracism mean? It means to extend positive favor to other people, regardless of, sometimes maybe even because of, their color, class, or culture. So it's extending grace to people. You say, well, I don't deserve it because they didn't work hard enough. Okay. Remember what grace is? You didn't deserve it, but it was given to you anyway. If they work hard enough, then they get it. Okay, that's true, but how if grace came to you that way? You don't get it until you work hard enough to get it, see? So grace is about extending favor to other people, regardless of, maybe sometimes even because of, their color, class, or culture. So then what are the 7 sayings, the 7 standards, if you will, of a gracist? They are I will statements, and I'm going to give you 7 I will statements. Now, before I do, let me just tell you, there was a Jewish family that was a part of my organization, and they invited me to come to their home for a visit. I go into the home. They lived in the Columbia area. I went to their home, and then when I walked into the living room, there were the 7 sayings of a gracist written on a board. And I sat on the couch and I said, oh, you guys are just kissing up to the pastor, aren't you? To which the mother said, oh no, you don't understand. This is our family constitution. And our 16-year-old daughter reminds us of it every day. Mom, you're not lifting me up. You're not lifting me up because I will lift you up. It's just one of the 7 sayings. And so understand that you take these 7 sayings, it can be your family constitution. It can make your marriage better if you're married. It can make your family better if your family is struggling in one of these areas. It can make our country better. What are they? Number 1, I will lift you up. Lifting up the humble among us by assisting and elevating them toward success. It's making a commitment to be a lifter. To break people down or to tear people down, but to lift people up. And so then the organization must ask the question, how can we lift this group of people up at Nielson that may not feel lifted up? What group might not feel lifted? Is it the older people? Is it the younger people? Is it the lighter people? Is it the darker people? Is it the more quiet people that don't speak? Who feels like it? Is it the laborers, the workers? Is it the researchers? Who? See, those are the kind of questions that move us toward when I talk about the art of inclusion. Let me give you the second one. The second one is I will cover you. That's protecting the most vulnerable among us from embarrassment and harm. We're not talking about cover up. We're talking about covering. And covering says, I'm going to make sure that that person, that group, that department is not embarrassed. Every single group has a backside. Cover it for them. Because what happens is when you have a place of division, it's always trying to uncover the worst part of that group and then taking that worst part and elevate it, saying, see, and that's where bad stereotypes come from. What graces do is say, how do we cover one another? Yeah, we all got mess. So how do we cover one another? So I don't have to cover myself up. I know you have my back, I have your back, and if there's something embarrassing about you, how do we deal with that in a sophisticated and more private way so that it doesn't come off like all Indians or all Asians or all African Americans or all programmers are this way? Because that's what happens when people aren't covered. We've got to cover one another. You still with me? All right, let's go to the third one. I will share with you. That means opening up networks and resources to others who are systematically downtrodden and refusing special treatment that may hurt them. In other words, we're going to share with one another to make sure we all succeed together. Not simply, I have a big pie, so I'm going to cut a piece and share my piece of the pie. It has more to do with sharing networks. So if I, have certain networks that you don't have, and I get hookups that you can't get, I still want my hookups. But to be able to help you get the same kind of hookup is going to help you succeed as well. And so it's sharing our resources and it's sharing our experiences together. Let's go to the next one. I will honor you. recognizing those who are the most humble heroes among us, regardless of color, class, or culture. So it's honoring what I call hidden heroes, the silent servants, the people who are doing great work, but they're never the ones that are coming up before the supervisors as the best people because maybe they don't present the report. But in order for that report to actually happen, it took a lot of work behind the scenes. If you're the gracist in the department, you're gonna make sure you lift them up as well. So when you get the compliment, you're gonna say, thank you so much. My team worked really hard, and here are the 3 people that really worked hard on this report to make sure that it turned out this well. See what I'm saying? That's what it means to honor one another. Let's go to the next one. I'm with you, committing to stand with the weak, and the majority committing to stand up for and with the minority. So whoever the majority group is in any context, it's their responsibility to stand with the minority. The stronger helps the weaker, and anybody can be in the position of the minority at any time. And so it's important, if you have a room full of people and everybody knows everybody, but a new person comes in, you're the majority, the new person's not. So you could say, well, if the new employee wants to get to know everybody, then they need to step up, speak up, they need to learn people's names, and you can put the onus on them. Well, they're not getting connected because they're not talking. Or you can say, no, I'm the gracist in the room. So the gracist is gonna say, you know what, they're new, I'm not, I know the unspoken rules. Let me go welcome them and show them around. That's what the gracist does. Moving on, I will consider you. This means having equal concern for our neighbors, regardless of color, class, or culture, by considering their perspective and needs. I will consider you. That means even if you're, I don't know what level you, power making group, the ones that make the decision, the gracist in the room is going to consider the others that aren't there as if they were there. So let's just say, without any judgment, it happens to be a board of men, and maybe it's 5 of them, and they make the major decisions of the corporation. But let's say out of those men, one has read the book Gracism. One has said, I want to be a gracist. One has said, I really want to understand inclusion and diversity. They're not going to change the board that day, but they are going to make a decision that day about whether they sell the company, whether they lay off certain numbers of people. I mean, they're making decisions. Now's not the time to talk about how we need to have women on the board and all that. No, but now is time for that one gracist in the room to be able to say, let's consider what this might mean for this group of people, the women, or the African American community. We cannot make decisions in a vacuum. If you have a gracist in the room, now they're thinking, what is this going to come off like? Not just from a marketing standpoint and a covering our behind standpoint, if we fire this person or if we hire this person, but actually, what will the emotional impact be and the unintended consequences be? Let's consider them as if they were here right now. Or can we pause this? I would like to go talk to a few people before I come back and cast my vote. Do you see how this could work? Let me get the final one. I will celebrate with you, rejoicing when the humble and the less fortunate among us are helped. So this is celebrating with those who finally get a win, whatever that win is, and the ability to be able to say, hey, congratulations, and finding ways to celebrate every time one group or one group of people get a win, whether it's a sales group or whether it's a different department. When they get a win, learn how to celebrate not just your own stuff, but other stuff. When you have celebrations like this, what I love to see, and I'm looking around the room, is the diversity of the people that are in this room. I've gone to companies where they'll have a Black sort of, History Month gathering. And those gatherings are actually worse for the company, in my opinion, because the ones that show up are the Black folk, and now they're there wondering, well, where's everybody else in the company? And then they're really mad because there's really 1 or 2 or 3 key people in the company that they really wanted to be there that weren't there. And so now it just becomes a thing of division. And so everybody's upset. The people that weren't there hear about it the next week, that people were mad that you weren't there, so they become defensive. The people that were there are so focused on the people that weren't there, they couldn't actually enjoy what they were there for. And so then people are talking about why are we doing Black History Month anyway? And there's a whole argument and conversations about Black History Month. And then people want to talk about slavery, and they want to go back into the past, and then white folk are tired of talking about slavery and going back in the past, and why don't you get over it? And before you know it, there's this whole, why y'all get a whole month anyway? And then the other side is like, yeah, but it's the shortest damn month of the year, And so it's just kind of like, really? So divisive. But when people celebrate one another, hey, it's Cinco de Mayo, I'm going to be there. I'm not Latino, but I'm going to be there. Asian Pacific, I'm going to be lunar, I'm going to be there. The Irish thing, great, it's coming up next month, let's all get green. I'm going to be there. That's your overview of the 7. Now, let me say them just one more time. I will lift you up, I will cover you, I will share with you, I will honor you, I will stand with you, I will consider you, I will celebrate with you. Think about this for yourself. What do you need more work on? What does your organization need more work on, or your department? Lifting, covering, sharing, honoring, standing, considering, celebrating. Something to think about. I'm going to double click on the first one just for a little bit. It may give you a way to think about, if you take this beyond today's talk, how could we double click on it? Let's talk about lifting up. I'm going to give you quickly 5 ways to lift one another up. These are actual things that you can do. The first one is to listen. If you want to lift somebody else up, listen. Comprehension begins with conversation. And when you listen to people, it's actually one of the greatest forms of loving. When you actually sit and listen and engage, hearing somebody else's story, being interested in someone else. Saying, tell me about your background. Tell me about your ethnicity. How did you guys celebrate holidays growing up? It's that sort of thing. So listening is important. I remember one time they were having a problem in the city of Columbus, Ohio. And so they called the mayor and they called the pastors and the school system, a bunch of people together. And they brought me in for a day to facilitate this entire day. They were having problems with the Somalis. Columbus has had, at least at that time, the second highest concentration of Somali citizens in the country, second only to Minnesota. I think that state had the most, maybe Minneapolis, but they migrated down to Columbus. And so there were problems like in the school system with the youth, the whole 9 yards. So we're pulling them together simply to have a conversation to see how we can learn from one another. And I'll never forget facilitating this conversation. There was one point where one of the Somali teachers said, or the Somali students and teachers that were there in the group said, we feel like in the schools you treat us like animals. And the public school system folk, some of the principals and the administrators were saying, how in the world do we treat you like animals? We treat everyone the same. That doesn't make sense. I said, let's pause just for a second. You say they treat you like animals. What do you mean? What is that? Tell me could you give me an example of what that feels like? To which the response was, well, for instance, Dr. Anderson, when a teacher calls a kid, the teacher says, come here. Come here. It says, in our country, that's how you call a goat. Really? The room got quiet. I said, well, how would you call a human? Oh, they said, oh, that's easy. So this way, in our culture, come. In their culture, come. I'm thinking Gucci, Gucci, Coo to my little baby daughter, at that point. It was that simple. Think about the dynamic learning that came just from listening, turning the hand over from this to this. And it simply started with listening. And secondly, here's a second way of lifting one another up, and that's learning. Not just listening, but learning. What can I learn from somebody else? If you feel like you know it all, then guess what? You're not going to have the art of inclusion down. You're never going to lift anybody else up because there's nothing anybody can do for you. But when you're learning and saying, I want to learn from others, I think that's absolutely critical. And so we talked about listening. We're talking about learning. Let me give you a couple other things that we can do. Listening, learning. Here's a third one. It's going to get kind of deep. Let go. This is dealing with forgiveness. It's very, very hard to lift others up, and it's very, very hard to ever go to the next level and elevate if you're holding on to old hurts and not letting go. Whether this is in Rwanda or whether this is the Amish who had to forgive unspeakable evils done to their community. Justice is so important. Fighting for justice is very critical. But there's a piece that I have watched when it works great. When it is not included in the discussion, people are still angry and you never find real resolve, and that is the power of forgiveness. Letting go of certain hurts. So listening, learning, letting go. Let me give you a couple more. Leverage. And then the last one is love. Leverage. This means taking all that you have, because you're so smart, you've got so many skills, many of you have got so many talents. How do you take those talents and leverage them to help somebody else? If I go to get a new car, I know exactly who to call. I know a female could go get a car and they could try to get her to pay a whole lot more money if she doesn't have the knowledge that's necessary. And in that community, I'm sorry if anybody's into car sales, it doesn't represent every car salesperson, but in their community, they have terms like we whacked them over the head. And they know how to do the psychology thing. And so, for instance, if a woman comes in and she wants to buy a vehicle, they'll say, great, you love this vehicle? Yeah, I love this vehicle. And she goes, yeah, but I need to really go talk to my husband. Oh, right, because you can't make this kind of decision on your own? And then gets all up in her feelings with regard to her self-worth. And so now I can make decisions on my own and all that. And so now they get her all caught up into that. Why you got to go ask a man and why you got to talk to your husband and all of this. And so now they get them all up into that. And before you know it, she's walking out with the car and she's paying $5,000 more. Leverage says, hey, listen, I call the person that gives me a hookup. I say, you know what? Let me call my network before you go in and say, hey, listen, I got my sister Susan. She's coming in. I want to make sure you give her the same hookup I got. And now she gets a good deal too. That's called leverage. That's called using your networks and your power to help lift other people up so that they get as good a deal as you. The last one is love. And this sounds really squishy, but the reality is you can define it like this: serving others with the motivation of a higher purpose. Love means serving other people with the motivation of a higher purpose. Even if I don't like you for some reason, I can still serve you with the motivation of a higher purpose. That it's not just you I'm serving, but there's someone greater that I'm serving. And that kind of love helps lift people up. So what have we learned so far? We've learned 7 sayings of a graceless. We've learned what gracism is. We've learned 5 ways to lift people up. Now let me pull it all together with a story and show a video in a couple minutes for questions and answers. Ferguson happened. Remember Ferguson? Michael Brown killed. August 2015, they called us in November 2015, so 3 months later. I go in and I pull what we call the 6 Ps, all right? So whenever we go into a community, we pull together police, protesters, pastors, private sector business, public educators, politicians. We get them all around what I call an uncommon table. These people don't usually sit together. They sit alone in their groups. They talk about the other ones. But you call an outside facilitator, I bring my team in, we pull them together. Amazing solutions can happen if you can get people talking together. So that's what we did in Ferguson. Now, it was a tough situation there, and of course, we're not saying we solved anything, but we can at least tell you the stories of what we know are true. For instance, the newspaper captured a whole bunch of protests on the streets of Ferguson in August of 2015, and here's a picture from their newspaper. Now, if you could just look at that police officer, what do you think, just two seconds, what do you think is going on in his head? Anybody? Real picture out of the newspaper. What do you think?
Get me out of here.
Get me out of here, yeah. Anybody else? Two more. Why am I here? One more.
What's wrong with them?
What's wrong with them? Okay. Now, what about the two black protesters there, woman, man? What do you think's going on in their and in their head? What do you see on those faces? Anger? Hurt? Hate?
Why won't you acknowledge us?
Why won't you acknowledge us? Frustration? Okay, so 3 months later, we then go in. We're having this conversation with the 6 Ps. I asked the protesters, 21 protesters in the room. I said, listen, talk to the police chief and tell me anything you want. I've got the police chief here. I've got his officers here. I've got the mayor here. I've got pastors here. I got professional football players here. I got the business community here. I got 21 of you, and y'all were out in the streets. Could you just say, if there's anything you could say, what would you say to them right now? The protesters said, you know what? We're sick and tired of them stopping us for no reason, because the light's out or something like that. They ride us day in and day out. They give us a ticket. They know we can't pay it, and they put us in jail. We're just sick and tired. They don't even speak to us. I said, okay, stop. I said, officers, when you hear this, what do you think? To which the police chief said, I need to tell my police officers to turn off their cell phones, turn off their computer, roll down their window, and say hello when they drive past. That seems so simple, but when they said that, the protesters were like, yes, yes. If they would just say hi. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? So that's the kind of conversation that's going on in this session here. And I said, okay, police officer, Officer Jerry, okay? What would you like to say to them? Honestly? I said, honestly. My bulletproof vest and my badge do not protect me from the things that you're saying about my wife and the things that you're saying, that I hope that you go home like Michael Brown tonight. I hope that your wife is a widow tonight. I hope you don't make it home tonight and you lay in the street for 4 hours. And Officer Jerry is saying my badge doesn't protect me from that, because I'm a human being too. Well, the protesters are like, okay. So now they're both humanized. Police are human, protesters are human. Now, I'm not saying we had a kumbaya, come to Jesus moment or anything like that, but I will tell you this. After hours together at the end of our meeting, we did take a picture, and guess who were there?
Wow.
None of them knew the other picture existed. I'm not saying they're doing Christmas dinners together or anything, but I am saying they've exchanged cell phone numbers. In the next protest, Officer Jerry would text Mel and Deja and say, this is where you guys can stand, and this is where we're going to be, where you guys going to be. And they text Officer Jerry back and say, hey, listen, we're going over here. Is this cool? Yeah, that's cool. Now they humanize one another. They see each other's right to do their job, but at least they realize that these are real people. Comprehension begins with conversation. And that's where you can see this picture together here. Let's see if we can get to the next slide. There you go. So the upper one and the bottom one. Big difference, right? You got time for just a little bit more? Okay. So out of this came more conversation. Now you have public educators. Anybody got kids in the public school? All right, so imagine your kids going to school in Ferguson, and imagine that your principals or your school administrators. Like Frank was a school in Howard County for years, working directly for the superintendent. Now he's a COO of Bridgeway Community Church. Wave, Frank, so everyone can see. If you had any kids go through Howard Public School, high schools, he was the leader of that. Blame him. All right, so remember we said 6 Ps? Public educators are there. So now we sit down with the public educators alone, and I pulled them to the side. I said, what do you guys need? There was a white woman, principal of an all-black school, Ferguson Elementary School. Cutest little white lady, blonde hair, probably in her 40s, and she just felt like it was her calling to be there. Her school, 100% black and 100% free or reduced breakfast and lunch. And she says to me, Dr. Anderson, and the superintendent's right next to her, we need a washing machine. I said, that's the answer to your problem, is a washing machine? She said, washing machine. I said, okay, so Tony, my special assistant, says, we can handle that. We're going to Whirlpool tomorrow. You're speaking to 500 Whirlpool executives tomorrow. I said, text them, see if they can get them a washing machine. So Tony texts them to say, would you give a free washing machine and dryer to this elementary school in Ferguson? And of course, they said yes. And so then the next day I go to Whirlpool, I tell them this story, and I said, thank you so much for taking care of that school. Well, they did more than take care of that school. You gotta understand, I didn't know this, I didn't grow up in that kind of poverty, but if kids don't have clean clothes, then they won't go to school. Did you know that? Like, I guess that's elementary to you, right? I didn't know that. Like, if their clothes are dirty, they're not gonna go to school the next day. What happens if they don't go to school and school attendance? Because their clothes are dirty, they don't eat. Because remember, free and reduced lunch and breakfast. So they're missing school, they're missing meals, all because of dirty clothes. So if this could solve a problem for you, I'm in. Get them a washer and a dryer. And so Whirlpool gave them a washer and a dryer. You know, the #1 appliance company in all of the world, right? They give them a washer and a dryer. Let me tell you what happened. The percentage of attendance went up to over 85%. Just because they got a washer and dryer. 6 months later, we go back, and guess what they tell us? Dr. Anderson, not only did they give a washer and a dryer to our school, they gave a washer and a dryer to every school in our district. And attendance has gone up. Last thing, since then, I want you to notice what has happened just with that one conversation and that one washing machine and dryer. Check this little 2-minute video out. They're working on it. While they're working on it, any, because that was really the last thing I wanted to show you. So hopefully they'll get it up in just a minute. Any, take a deep breath, by the way. I know I said a lot for the last 40 minutes or so. Any comments or questions regarding what we've been talking about? Sir.
I have a question. I get that, I gotta work on me and I own stuff. I'm not gonna pretend like I don't say. But one consideration, how do you help others who you know don't consider?
We help others consider when they don't, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I think you just do it by example. You can't help make people change, but you can show them an example of what consideration looks like. Have we considered That's the best you can do. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Sir?
How do you balance racism with not feeling like you're being disrespected if you allow someone the grace to disrespect you? If that's how you interpret it.
Okay, ask it one more time with the microphone, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. How do you practice racism without feeling like you might be feeling disrespected by the other person?
Yeah, so when you're offended, right, how do you still extend racism? How do you balance that? I think it's the harder thing to balance is the gracism part. Because we have the offense part down. We know how to respond when people offend us. We got that down pretty much. I don't think that that's our problem. I think our problem is the other side. So I would say work on the other side of extending grace because we're already used to being offended. Now, it could be a question, how do I deal with offense better? Because, you know, I don't know about you, but I haven't always dealt with offense great. And so part of it was, for me, is how can I be a gracist in this situation where I'm pulled over by police officers 4 times in one day, my first day on the job as an intern in Chicago. How do I deal with that? The offense part, yes, I want to be angry, I want to be legal. There's a lot that I could talk about on that end. You know, how do I deal with the cross in my front yard when we moved to Delphi, Maryland? You know, how do I deal with, I could give you a list of things that have happened in my life. I know how to deal with those offenses, and I know how to be hurt, angry. I know how to be doing things back that are not kind. But it's this other side that nobody really taught me how to do. So I think if you want balance, the balance is going to be the grace side, and that's actually going to heal the race side. How we looking?
Got it.
You sure?
Yep, I just need a microphone.
Okay, microphone. You can have mine. You want mine? Yeah, use mine because the other one's not working very well. Are you gonna read?
No. Just with the speaker.
Oh no, then get the other one because I need to read on this video a little bit. The video is gonna have some words on it. You're not gonna be able to read it, so I'll just read it out loud. Good questions, by the way. Thank you. Gotta hold a microphone up to that. That's hilarious. Every day in the U.S., more than 4,000 students drop out of school. Kids who drop out have a 40% higher unemployment rate, a 70% higher rate of government assistance, are more than 8 times as likely to be incarcerated.
When I wake up in the morning and I find out I have no clean clothes, I usually end up just staying home. When I was homeless, we had no clean clothes because we only had a little bit of money and we used that money for food.
I think people don't talk about not having clean clothes because it makes you want to cry or go home or run away or something. It doesn't feel good.
Every day, thousands of kids miss school because they lack one thing: clean
If
clothes.
they miss school, then they're not going to get their education. And if you don't have an education, you can't do anything. They really deal with a lot of just very practical challenges that I never had to face.
We have a washer and dryer at home. It's just that our electricity was shut off.
If there are kids whose education is at risk because they don't have access to clean clothes, that's something we can help with. Care Counts is really about seeing how laundry can impact attendance rates, and how we're able to do that is providing washers and dryers into school districts.
It was so exciting because I could think of like 20 kids off the top of my head who, boy, this is going to make a difference.
They want you to put as much clothes as you can, fit in a bag, and then they have you bring them to the school and then wash them.
Year 1, 2 districts, 17 schools, 23 loads washed.
Since the program has been in the school, my attendance is consistent. The goal is 90, we have over 90% all the time.
I can just look at specific kids and know that because they're in the program, they've been at school every day this year.
Before the program, I think I would have said, "You're crazy, a washer and dryer? That seems way too simple." But I think now looking at it, I think we know that it's made a positive impact.
I definitely think the program has long-lasting impact because if it gets kids to come to school, then they can work to get an education and, get out of poverty and help their families get out of poverty.
We originally started this hoping to impact attendance rates. What we didn't realize was the impact that it would have on so much more.
Over 90% of track students increased attendance over the previous year. At-risk students attended school almost 2 weeks more than the previous year. Teachers saw increased class participation in 89%
How
of
I
track
feel
students.
with clean clothes, hanging out with my friends. I feel like nothing can stop me.
In year 2, the program is expected to expand to over 30 more schools. Nearly 300 schools have expressed interest in the program. It's pretty cool, right? So when you think about private sector business, you think about the 6 Ps.